2. Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. All of the purple coming together here, doing some Festivus 1 to look at Festivus 3. No one more Festivus-oriented than this guy. He's always around town. We run into him when he's not chasing his beautiful children playing sports in Georgia and other places, and a softball dad. He is Brad Jackson, BJack50. You can find him anywhere the internet is sold. Dude, you've been under the radar here lately, being a parental dad. I have not talked to you at all about the wonders of Lamar Jackson, so I can't wait to hear what you have to say about all this purple madness, Brad.
Well, I'm just glad that, the young fella keeps doing well and representing the Jackson family name to the highest level. Hopefully that garners an MVP for him, and even more importantly, hopefully another world championship for the Baltimore Ravens, that he could bring home as he predicted, the night he got drafted.
What do you make of all of this, dude? You've been here from the beginning. You've criticized at various points and praised at various points. You were a pretty critical guy when you were on TV in some ways when the team wasn't performing well. And
what's wrong with honesty,
dude?
In this day and age, people look at critique as being critical when it's being honest, because the same things that I said on radio and television is the same thing that these guys see when they look in the mirror. It's the same things that these guys hear when they go in meetings on Tuesday mornings, and then they hear the same thing. So having been there, done that, it's always funny, and I've had this conversation with plenty of people in the building and that who understand it and never say it's critical. They just say, you're just honest. And that's the way I always have been. That's the way I was taught by Marvin Lewis and Jack Del Rio and Rex Ryan. And, before that, when I was in college, Rex Ryan was my defensive coordinator, and Buddy Ryan, God rest his soul, he used to come up from the horse farm in Kentucky and preside over and make sure that he, as he would say, don't F up my defense, after he had, got fired from Arizona. So, and Wink Martindale, who was my linebacker coach at the University of Cincinnati, and Mike Tomlin, who was our graduate assistant at the University of Cincinnati. So if you look at those guys and who I've been around, there is no, as we were always taught, there's no excuses, no explanations. And, the same way that things and the people said the evil empire of doing your job, it's the same thing that we have here in Baltimore. So I laugh at that when people always say, on the outside of being critical, but it's being honest. And when people aren't playing to expectations, you call them out. When they are playing to expectations, you praise them. And that's all players always ever want in and of itself. So.
Well stated. I remember Marvin always saying, there's no my bad around here. There's once the film comes on, there can be, you can't go to Ray Lewis and Goose and Rob Burnett and say my bad, right?
No. Nobody wanted to hear my bad. Nobody, as Rex Ryan used to say, I don't want hand clappers and turf slappers. You see those guys when they don't make a play, they clap their hands or they pound the turf. We don't want hand clappers or turf smackers, and we don't want guys to say my bad. Do your job. And that's the same way I've done it when I've gotten the media side, and it has nothing to do with I have a tremendous amount of love and respect for the organization. I'm very close still with Mr. Bisciotti. I'm very close, obviously, with Wink Martindale. I go to the building. I still help out. I go up there and watch film a little bit. So I enjoy being around the guys, at a low level outside the radar type of thing. So, and I have nothing but love, and I cheer for the Ravens more than anybody else. And I played for two other franchises with the Dolphins and Panthers. And, but obviously Baltimore has become home. My children, my family, everyone associates me, with being a Raven, and I'm a Raven for life. And that will never change. So, in 2008, Coach Harbaugh's first year, I was one of the interns that helped bridge the gap between the players that were here that some I play with. All of them I was pretty much friends with. And then when he came over with the new regime as a new head coach. So, that goes in and of itself. And I've been knowing Coach Harbaugh since he recruited me when I started as a 16-year-old, little skinny wide receiver. And he was our running back coach and recruiting coordinator at the University of Cincinnati. So those guys, it goes deeper than the Ravens. These are people that I've known since I was a teenager and played for and played with, all the way through college. So I cheer and want nothing but the best of success for them.
Well, this is great that we've spent 5 minutes talking about you being honest or critical. I've been accused of the same things, Brad. I remember when Art Modell first met me, he said to me, and I've written about this in both of the books because it's so poignant, because it's so not modern, right? He'd say, "Young man, never be afraid to criticize me. If all you do is praise me, they'll never believe a word you say."
Right.
So,
That's absolutely correct. So, and I know, it's the same with Mike Preston. The problem is, and in this day and age of America and in sports, everybody wants to be patted on the back. But, when you don't do what you're supposed to do, then all of a sudden, if you say, you're not doing what you're supposed to do, then all of a sudden you're a hater or you're critical or, and as I said, these are the same things that I say. If a linebacker doesn't make the play and he's in the wrong gap and, these situations occur, guess what? If you say it on radio and you say it on television, those guys are hearing it in the meeting room. And more importantly, it's put on the big board in front of 53 guys, and your entire teammates and coaching staff are watching you miss a tackle, blow an assignment, make a play that could cost you not only a game, a playoff game, a championship. So it's that critical in the building. That's why I'm bald at only 44 years old, because, there was a lot of high stress that goes along with that. And when you're on the defense as great as we were, when you have the coaching staff that I just named, there is a level of accountability that stands, whether it's the University of Alabama and Nick Saban saying the level of accountability has to be at the highest point and everybody has to be in strive for that same level. It's the same level that has allowed the Patriots to go to 10 Super Bowls in the last 19, 20 years. So it's the same level of excellence that has allowed our tradition of defense to withstand, the changing of the guard from Ray Lewis, even though he did it for 19 years, and the Ed Reed, who was here and then left, and the Terrell Suggs, who obviously was here and left, and all the many players that have come in, whether it's Goose, Rob Burnett, Michael McCreary, all the way down to some of the current guys, who are still trying to establish themselves. The foundation of the defense is that it started with Jack Del Rio, Marvin Lewis, Rex Ryan. It continued to Rex Ryan. It continued down to now Wink Martindale. And that level and being in that meeting and being in that meeting room, that is what has allowed the Ravens defense to have the sustainability that it has, is because the brutally honest of what happens when you're on that field and in the meeting rooms. And it's the same thing that we say to the public, whether they like to hear it or not.
Brad, it's interesting you'd say that about the brutal honesty and all that, and this is where I want to, you praise the defense and the history and all that stuff. Then it comes to Lamar, right? Like, this is so different, and there's a lot of praise to go around for Lamar at this point, and I've talked at length the last 2 months about the organization, right? And this is where I'm going to allow you to praise Ozzie and Eric and everything that's happened here, from not just drafting the kid and moving up to the first round and getting the extra year, and the hurt feelings of Flacco and Weddle and Suggs and all the guys at the Za'Darius, everybody that departed. But the way they've built around him over the last 18 months, the way they've used analytics, the way they brought in these big tight ends, the way they brought in wide receivers who block and linemen who want to go downhill, the running backs, the style of running backs, the leadership of Mark Ingram, losing C.J. Mosley and Terrell Suggs in the middle of the night, and signing another Hall of Famer, Earl Thomas, in the morning. And then there's this in-season thing where, y'all got together. Last time I think you and I got together, we were praising Brian Billick. Brian was raising the Lombardi Trophy to the sky. And then they got their ass kicked by the Browns, right? And since that game, when you think about Eric DeCosta's game, right, of L.J. Ford, Jihad Ward, Josh Bynes, let's trade for Marcus Peters. Let's sign Marcus Peters. Hey, Damata Pekka needs a job. Let's bring him in to clog up the run. This has been a master class over 18 years of running an organization, really, right?
Yeah, no question. And again, it's one of the things that makes the Ravens different, is that a lot of times when you see these sorry coaches and these sorry programs in the National Football League, is they try to bring a guy in and they try to force him to be what they want him to be. When you pop in the tape, there are certain things that certain people are able to do. Like, that's just the reality. Peter Boulware was a way better pass rusher than I was. I was a better run player. So you can't ask Peter to do certain things that he could do it because he was gifted and very athletic and he could do the job, but his asset and what he did best was being able to get after the quarterback. And Pete and I talked about it at the same game you just talked about, that one of the favorite times of his career is when I was starting at, at linebacker, and he was just able just to rush the quarterback. So those type of things occur, and what the Ravens have been able to do is bring in people and allow them to do their job and their roles. So when you bring in a Domata Pekka, who I know from my time and doing my internships with the Cincinnati Bengals, and was a great guy, great pickup, great family man, and is somebody that's going to play hard and a chance to be on a winning program, this is something that he strived for. He went from the Bengals for a number of years, and he goes out to Denver. This is the first time that he's had a taste of this type of success, and he's excited as all get out. And then when you're able to, like you said, to bring in the other players, because the linebackers that they had to get rid of, who actually, again, what I talked about a few minutes ago, guys that didn't do the job, well, that's why number 40 got shipped off out of here, because he wasn't able to do the job and make plays, and it happened over and over and again, and ultimately they went back out, and they got a former Raven, Josh Bynes, who was sitting at home on the street. Then they get, like you said, DJ Ford, and they get him to come in, and those guys are excelling in their roles. They tell you what your job is. They tell you what your role is. They're not asking those guys to go out there and be cover linebackers. They're not asking Domata Pekka to be on the defensive end and give us 10.5 sacks. They're asking them to come in, bring a veteran presence, do their job, play to run hard. And your 20 to 25, 30 plays, you know exactly what your role is going to be. You know exactly what your job is going to be, and it allows them to play fast. And that's what they've been able to do defensively. And then offensively, it's the same thing. You bring in a veteran guy. We lost the veteran in Terrell Suggs, and everyone talked about it. You and I talked about it over the summer, on your show. Where was the leadership going to come from? And I said, we'll find out. Well, they bring in a Mark Ingram, who's kind of solidified that role, offensively. Defensively, Earl Thomas, again, as we said, months ago, just because you're the highest paid and you've been on a team, you still have to go out and make plays. That's how you become a leader. It doesn't matter if you're the oldest or the highest paid or how many Pro Bowls you went to. You still have to produce in the National Football League, because the eye in the sky of film don't lie. And so Earl's been able to come in, but you still had the Jimmy Smiths, and you still had the Brandon Williams. You still have guys who have been here that have put in the groundwork to be able to allow this team to mature together. And it's almost like a college atmosphere when you kind of look at it, that they're so young with a couple mix of seniors, a.k.a. veterans, that this team is kind of just rolling along. And that's kind of like part of the reason why they're having a tremendous amount of fun doing their jobs and what their roles are and what they've been defined in, whether it's from the offensive coordinator, Greg Roman, or from defensive coordinator, Wink Martindale.
John Harbaugh. How old was John when you met John, and how old were you? You called yourself a skinny wide receiver. You're 17 years old, right?
I was 16 years old when Coach Harbaugh first came to my high school and watched film. That was the old school days. There was no huddle. There was none of this digital stuff. College coaches.
Well, he was a celebrity because his brother was playing quarterback. Right? Hey, that's Jim Harbaugh's brother, right? Like a little bit of that, right?
that was part of the recruiting tool, because actually Jim, used to come down because, Jack Harbaugh, Coach Jack was right across the bridge from the University of Cincinnati in Kentucky coaching. So, Jim would come down and he would go help recruit and do and work out over there, at Western Kentucky where Coach Jack was. And then obviously, his brother, and at that time, Jim was captain comeback for the Colts. So obviously you knew who he was. And then this was his brother. So that was part of the recruiting tool. And then, Jim was always a guy that would come to the University of Cincinnati and throw with guys and hang out. So that was always exciting as well. So Coach was the running back coach and obviously the recruiting coordinator. So, you look at it now, I'm 44 minus 16. So that's almost 28 years, I guess it is, or 18 years.
So you met him in 91 or 92, somewhere in there?
Yeah, 91, 92, exactly.
All right, so tell me what you see when John Harbaugh standing in that locker room, handing out game balls, and Brandon Williams comes in and I had someone, it's Mark Clayton, or I've talked to so many of you this week, they all run together. Mark talked about watching that guy versus the guy he met in 2008 when he was a wide receiver trying to make his way, that there's a different emotional intelligence, there's a different, that John's 12 years older. We're all 12 years older, right?
He's evolved, and I will say that, and I've been knowing Coach longer than probably anybody there other than Coach Rosberg, who obviously retired after last year. And he's definitely evolved. He's evolved at who he is as a coach. Sometimes he could be hard. Sometimes it can be soft, you know what I'm saying? But he definitely, a lot of the times, was always, because, again, he's coming from the coaching background where, you know, Jim was always, you know, and everyone's heard the stories where Jim was always the favorite. You know, Coach Harbaugh, he played DB and went to Miami, Ohio. Well, his brother was a quarterback. Quarterbacks always get more love than any other position. His brother went to Michigan. He was a legend, and he still is a legend on the field at Michigan. He hasn't quite, you know, beat Ohio State as a coach, but on the field as a player, he's a Wolverine legend. And then obviously he played for Bo Schembechler, who's a legend, and they won a lot of games and Rose Bowls. And then he goes in the NFL, and you know he has a pretty good career with the Colts, and he's captain comeback for pretty good career for the Bears, and then he's captain comeback for the Colts. And so you know he had a long productive career, and then he played here, which is funny that my rookie year in 1998, Jim was actually, you know, he finished the year at quarterback. So I played, you know, for John as a player at University of Cincinnati, and then I obviously played with his brother Jim, you know, as a Baltimore Raven in 1998. So, but that all goes from the competitiveness that they've had since they're children. So Coach Harbaugh has always had that high level of competitive fire and desire. You know, Jim is obviously 6'3", 6'4". Coach Harbaugh, you know, he'll tell you he's 5'10". He's probably a little shorter than that. Quarterback, DB, Miami, Ohio versus University of Michigan. NFL career versus, you know, he went straight into coaching. So obviously that he has the Super Bowl win over his brother from, you know, the 2012 season from 2017. And, you know, so he's evolved to the point where he's become more understanding. And I think because his team is so young, you know, Nestor, it's that he's been able to have the role that he kind of has established when he was in college where, you know, he may have been hard and a lot of guys didn't understand certain things, but when you're in the National Football League and you have those veterans like Ray Lewis who are not only just veteran players, they're Hall of Fame Gold Jacket players. And then we all know about, you know, the beef with, you know, Bernard Pollard and Terrell Suggs and Corey Redding and all these things that occurred, you know, early on. And then obviously they win the championship in 2012 with a bunch of veterans. And we've kind of seen it turn over since then that they've gotten younger and younger. And now he's kind of has, you know, he's the biggest voice in the building, and he's the one that all those young guys need to look to, which is a great thing for him. And he's evolved to not only be, you know, a great coach, but also a master Jedi as far as what all coaches need to do, and that's be able to Jedi mind trick your certain players to get everybody pulling in the same direction. And they've been able to do that. So his evolution, as Mark Clayton has said, and I was there in 2008, and I know how him and Derek Mason got into their fights and arguments and the defense. And I mean, there were some very critical times, and the team won because they were talented. You know, it's not like Coach Billick left the cupboard bare, you know, when Coach Harbaugh took over. They had been 13-3, you know, in 2006, and then unfortunately 6-10 in 07. Which caused Coach Billick, you know, to obviously be relieved of his duties. So that team was very talented and stacked, and then they drafted a first-round quarterback and drafted a pretty good running back who made the Pro Bowl second round in Ray Rice. So, and we all know Joe Flacco was the first-round pick. So, you know, he has definitely evolved and became, like, in his last 11, 12 years here, and probably with the help of his father, you know, who was a great coach himself and a great mentor. I mean, what better mentor could you have than your father, who obviously had success in doing it is right by your side as well. So he's definitely evolved, and it's paying dividends for this team, as you can see with the best record in franchise history, being 14-2, and the first time, you know, the franchise has got the number one seed in the playoffs.
Getting together with nothing but Raven alums and surrounding myself in purple lights and headed off to Miami to try to find party locations to relive the Whiskey Joes of 2001. Brad Jackson here, B-Jack 50, of course. So, look, man, we've been beating around the bush 20 minutes. We talked about Art Modell and Super Bowl memories and accountability. We've dropped Marvin's name. Dude, you haven't said anything about Lamar. I mean, like, the only story for you is I was out in L.A., after the game at the Memorial Coliseum, out in your homeland, out in California, right?
Yeah,
and,
La La Land.
You know, I had never been to the Memorial Coliseum. After the game, we kicked their ass, you know. I mean, you can see the Hollywood sign off to the left. You see L.A. downtown, and you see the scoreboard. It's 45-6. Go down. Eric Weddle, you know, had just such an interesting thing to say, and it wasn't sort of on the record. It was more like a conversation we were having. He said, we couldn't see where the ball was. He said, you know, I practiced against it for a year. I got the film. Everybody's asking me, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? The first thing you need to do is know where the ball is. And if you don't know where the ball is, and then Nick Boyle's cracking down on you, which you know about in the run game, getting out on the move, that this thing's trouble. I want you to give me why the Lamar thing is so difficult for a linebacker like you or even a coach like you to sit and try to defend this thing, and why we're going to win the Super Bowl 4 weeks from now.
Well, what makes it difficult is that people aren't doing their jobs. I mean, what they're doing and what Greg Roman is doing is not – it's not reinventing the wheel. They're just basically playing power running game, old school power running game that you were used to and all the Ravens fans were used to when we were in the black and blue division, when you had Fred Taylor and James Littleman Stewart in Jacksonville. We had the Bus and Zaraway in Pittsburgh. You had Eric Redd pounding the ball in Cleveland. You obviously had Eddie George down in Tennessee. We all know what those games were like, twice a year and how physical it was. And then our own running game and what we imposed on people. So because from high school football to college football to the National Football League, everybody is about throwing the football and quarterbacks throwing, for 4,000 yards like Jameis Winston, throw for 5,000 yards, but got 30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions. So who cares if you throw for yards? But unfortunately, because social media and the media and fans not being, educated enough, they just look at the numbers of what it is. And what they've done is they've gotten back to old school smash mouth football. And the rest of the league, because they spend so little time, on stopping the run, because everybody's so focused on stopping the pass, because everybody's throwing the football, that right now they've caught the league off guard. So that's kind of like what happened many years ago with the Wildcat. And remember, the Wildcat was beating everybody to death, and nobody was going to be able to stop it. And then they figured it out, and then, of course, that went away. So part of it is lack of assignment, lack of accountability. The other part of it is teams just aren't physical. The league just isn't as physical as it used to be, in National Football League. It's just not, because guys are afraid of getting fined. Guys are afraid of hitting. There's not the swarm that you really see that much, minus, obviously our own Ravens and a few other teams like San Francisco that really play defense at a high level. And part of it is just Lamar special. It's one of the things that I even said, when he was drafted, and everyone thought he was going to go to the Patriots at 32, and then obviously Osley pulled the trigger to get Lamar. People forget that he did win the Heisman Trophy throwing the football as well. So it may not be the prettiest. It may not look like, something that, you're the prototypical quarterback, but he completes the passes, which is why he led the National Football League in completion percentage. And what he's able to do in the offense, again, it goes back to what we said 5-10 minutes ago, which is they're creating and putting an offense in place that benefits him. They're not trying to make him run the offense that Joe Flacco ran. They're not trying to make him run an offense that, Greg Roman ran when he was in Buffalo or even in San Francisco, when they played and came to the Super Bowl. This is something that is completely different, and utilizing 2 and 3 tight ends has enabled and gave him confidence. One of the concerns, if you look at it defensively, is that he's not throwing outside the numbers. Most of his completions are coming in between the hash marks, in between the numbers, and that's okay, because defense, linebackers, and safeties have to be so cautious of where the football is that now with tight ends, Hayden Hurst, even Nick Boyle and obviously Mark Andrews, with their speed and ability to run routes almost as good as wide receivers, they're getting behind those DBs and linebackers, and he's, putting the ball on the money. So it's just the offense is fit perfectly for him, and Greg Roman is having a great time, basically just disguising a lot of things with those 2 tight ends in the backfield, whether it's a power, whether it's a counter, whether it's a lead open. And then it's just the lack of knowledge and the lack of practicing against it that defenses don't have, because they spend all offseason and all training camp going against 3 and 4 wide receivers. So they're just not used to the physicality, and the Ravens offensive line is just, they're just steamrolling people downhill, and that's what is causing the offense of Lamar to be able to have so much opportunity, and why it's the number 1 offense and the number 1 rush offense in the history of the National Football League.
You know, Brad, we always focus on the championships, you know, as I'm bathed in the purple lights here in the studio and your championship wing and your ring and the win and the 13 team and the win. Man, there are a lot of disappointments here, right? Like, you know, getting bounced out in 01 and 03 and 06 after the bye. Yeah. You know, the Billy Cundiff and the Lee Evans, you know, all the things that have Palomalu and the pick, all the things that have happened. Where is your confidence level that they have 3 wins in them, that they're going to hold serve, that they are going to get this done? What's going to get in the way here, other than maybe Patrick Mahomes or whomever they would see at the finish line in Miami if they were to get there? I have full confidence that they're not going to lose next weekend. I don't feel like they're going to lose to an inferior team at home in January.
Right. I don't either. And the one concern you always have, and Coach Harbaugh is going to harp on this all week this week and obviously all week next week, is, and you have to be concerned with a young team that we definitely have. You know, obviously the nucleus of this team is young, but, you know, Earl Thomas and Mark Ingram, you know, those guys, and Damata Pecco, a veteran guy, they'll be able to kind of remind them, because Earl Thomas has been there, Mark Ingram has been there in big games, you know, in the playoffs, that you can't take it for granted just because you beat, you know, the breaks off the Houston Texans here, you know, a month and a half, 2 months ago. You can't take it for granted that you went to Buffalo, which was probably the toughest game they had since the Cleveland game, and it came down to a 4th and 7 breakup by Marcus Peters in order for them to win to win the game in Buffalo. You can't take that for granted, because Buffalo actually played them pretty well. Josh Allen played like trash, credit to our defense. But, you know, that's one of the things. You can't overlook them and start worrying about whether it's New England or whether it's Mahomes or that it's at home, because in 2006, which I think was probably one of the best teams in the history of the franchise, you know, that team they were loaded on defense. They had a way better offense than we had in 2000. And, you know, they laid an egg against the Colts, you know, and didn't score an offensive touchdown. And the Colts, you know, kicked 5 field goals to win that game and ultimately went on down to Miami, ironically, to win the Super Bowl. So they have to make sure they stay focused, because once the playoffs start, everything is out the window. Nobody cares that Lamar led the league in touchdowns. No one cares he led the league in passing touchdowns. No one cares about all the things that he did great, because right now it's 0 for 0. And now you are the hunted, because whether it's the Texans or whether it's Sean McDermott, you know, and I know Coach McDermott pretty well, whether it's him up in Buffalo, they are going to come in as the underdog. Everybody knows that the Ravens now have the bullseye on their back. And, you know, that's a different challenge, you know, when you're the hunted versus the hunter. So I fully expect them, obviously, to take care of business next week. I'm quite sure Coach Harbaugh, Coach Wink, you know, obviously Coach Roman, you know, along with those guys that we just mentioned, will make sure that these young guys understand what has to occur this week. Even though it's a bye week, you can't just go out and party and take off trips and go down to Florida and go to Vegas and go do all the things. You have to stay in the moment, stay prepared, and keep your routine the same, because you don't want to go out there and, like you said, and lay an egg. So I fully expect them to take care of business next week. And then obviously Kansas City would be a different challenge. You know, they're playing well right now, but, you know, I don't even want to talk about that. We can talk about that next week, because you have to take care of business, whoever it is, versus the Texans or the Bills, because otherwise than that, this will be probably the greatest disappointing season in the history of Ravens football if they are not hoisting the Lombardi Trophy in Miami the first week of February.
I am preparing for success while making sure we deflect any sort of failure around here over the next couple of weeks. So we'll keep it positive going into 2020. Brad, it's always great to catch up with you, man. I appreciate your insights, man.
Always good to catch up with you. Always good. Happy New Year, everybody, and God bless. And as always, thanks for having me.
Great wisdom, as always. B Jack 50, the way to find him. Brad Jackson from the Super Bowl 3501. The vintage Ravens we're doing around here. Alums everywhere. I got purple rope lights. They're all kind of, I think they're freaking out my cat, poor Nala. Find me out on the interweb. If you want to go to Miami with us, throw me a note, nasty@WNST.net. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, anywhere you are. Sending purple rope lights your way. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Taos in Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.